If you'll indulge me for just a moment, I want to have a realistic conversation about the reality of the situation versus the aspiration of hope as it relates to political dysfunction and societal discourse today in America. To ensure that we have a wholesome conversation, I want to present some data for you to consider. Leaders in America today are disappointing America's public. The majority of Americans feel that they're not prepared to lead and respond to the moral crisis that exists. And they don't hold the same moral values that the American public does today. This, my friends, is according to a U.S. News and Harris poll that found 86% of Americans today are largely disappointed in the state of their leadership at the top of the political atmosphere. Of that, 47% of Americans believe that they are strongly disappointed. Meanwhile, my friends over at Gallup report that 54% of Americans believe that American political and social leadership is extremely poor from a moral perspective. 83% of Americans told Gallup that the state of American moral leadership is getting worse, and 74% of Republicans believe they're getting worse, and 97% of overall Americans say this is the worst they've ever seen. One man on a mission to try and inject some objectivity and moral clarity in this situation of societal and political dysfunction is my friend Damien Dubose. He's an ethical thought leader based in the epicenter of political dysfunction, Washington, D.C. He's got a deep passion for American ethics, which he approaches through an integrative method using both psychology and philosophy. As the author of America's Ethical Archetype, he advocates for transformable change in both governance and education. He's hoping through his work not only to help the country understand the root causes of political dysfunction in America, but also offers practical solutions that we can all implement to fix it, encouraging a national dialogue on ethical leadership and political integrity. And Dubose joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, my friend, I will welcome you formally to the program, and I'm super excited to talk about American political dysfunction and American ethics with you this morning. Great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, David, I wanted to start by asking you, what do you think America has an ethics problem? Because I know you use both philosophy and psychology to study the impact of ethics on society, my friend. So tell me, do you think America has an ethics problem?
I mean, I do. I think it's just something that's it's been neglected. I think when I talk about ethics in the book, it's a very specific thing. It takes a philosophical take on ethics. And I just think that some of our foundational ideas or principles in America, we've lost we've lost touch with those ideas. And so what has occurred is just that we've lost our identity. We don't really have anything that we can point to say, okay, this is the essence of America. This is what America is. And I think just that the concept of ethics or the philosophy of ethics is just, what is that fundamental idea that keeps us together as a country? So that's why that's the focus of the book, and I talk about ethics, and I do think that there's an issue with our ethical foundation.
Yeah, and I'm curious, just before I ask you about the book, to ask you about how do you think America gets back to a place of spirited and debatable compromise without a feeling so territorial? What are your thoughts there?
Oh, I mean, I guess I don't know if I would even say that it's a place of getting back to, right? I would first start with saying, hey, this might be a new evolution, a new step in history. I think, to kind of make it simple, I think that there was some good fundamental principles at the beginning of America, and I think slowly over time they eroded, our adherence to those principles. But there were also some negative things that that were part of the history that may cause people to disassociate from those principles, or not necessarily from the principles, but from the idea of America. And I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of conflation of where people just don't understand what are those essential principles. So to answer your question, how do we get to a place? I just think this is, for me, what I'm trying to do is take a step and make a start and just say, hey, let's explicitly, state what is the essence of America? What are the foundational principles? And let's identify our identity and move forward based upon that understanding.
Yes, for sure, my friend. And let's dive into the book, my friend, because I know in the book you advocate for transformable change in governance and education, my friend. So tell me about the
Yes.
book, why you decided to write it, and what you're hoping people get from it.
So the book came about because of so just to give a little backstory, um, at some point in time when I was going through college and going for my MBA, I started getting involved a lot with these aptitude tests. Now, this was just something that I was interested in, throughout the years, psychological profiles, things of that nature. I've always kind of like philosophical ideas, psychological ideas. And so started getting involved with these aptitude tests, and they really helped me while I was, trying to find out what I wanted to do for a career path or pursuit. And also around this time, I became knowledgeable or aware of specific philosophy, and this specific philosophy was objectivism, and this is a philosophy that was born from Ayn Rand, and a philosophy that she developed. And so, me being understanding both avenues for some time, and I kind of, at some point in time in, I think 2022, I went to the foundation of well, let me say, I guess I left out the part that the psychology part led me to a lot of the MBTI four-letter dichotomies. A lot of people know them as, INTJs, INTPs, whatever, ENFJs, and MBTI results. And so I did a little deep dive in that. And then what I started to learn is that a lot of what we know today about those types are a little bit different than what they were when they started with Jung's psychological archetypes. So me doing a deep dive into both topics, I finally just read Jung's original work and just saw that there was so much overlap between these two thinkers. And somehow it just clicked for me that it was an opportunity to try to bring some clarity or a little more clarity to ethics or psychology or philosophy, and I try to do it in a way that is simple enough that most people can grasp. So that was kind of like my impetus for trying to bring this book about. So
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, I know that you work with people to also understand what one would call sort of the country's political dysfunction and sort of where we are from a political perspective. Before we started talking today, we were talking about how there's a fundamental choices in this upcoming election, my friend. So, how do
right.
you think America got so politically divided, and what do you think is the root cause of the political dysfunction in the country?
I would say, to put it simply, the way that I go about it in the book is there is an expectation in America from the work that I've done that we are developing individuals. And at the end of the day, if we're not developing people to be individual adults, then that system doesn't work. It can't sustain itself. So it takes a lot to do that. And that's why I talk about, ethics, and I talk about education, and I talk about explicitly acknowledging these things, because it has to be embedded in the system holistically. You have to know that that's the expectation, that we are raising people who take full responsibility for their choices and their judgment. And without that, we just can't sustain this. You can't sustain this system. And that to me, because we haven't maintained that stance, is why, to me, I've seen there's an erosion, I believe, and I believe that erosion is because we don't maintain that stance.
Yeah, and David, tell me, I'm curious to dive into how we reinstate sort of a political dialogue with integrity. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Oh, that to me is, oh, how did we get there? I mean, I think it starts with education. And I think that's something that I get from Ayn Rand and objectivism as well. Um, Politics is a last circumstance. It's just like the final part of our collective beliefs, about ethics and things, and well, just ethics, just say that. And so it's a work in progress. The politics are an example of the way that we think. So that's why my first step is just to address how are people thinking about these things, and try to simplify it and try to communicate and help people understand how to think about these things. And that's the first step. I think politics to me is a consequence, and I think a lot of people try to take the first step in politics, but really this book is about ethics, and the benefits in politics are a result of addressing ethics in the proper way.
Yeah, and Damien, you brought up education a couple of times in our discussion. So I want to talk to you about Project 2025, which seems to be the Republicans' platform for this upcoming election, which calls for the elimination of the Department of Education, my friend, if they get their way. So tell me about how dangerous you think our political climate is in America, and whether you had any specific thoughts on Project 2025 itself.
I mean, I wouldn't try to make a comment on that particular thing, directly. I could just speak in general. I think the it is important. I would say education is important, but the idea of educational, like a centralized system, I think it can be a dangerous idea. I understand the desire, to provide people education. I mean, I would want that as well. That's something that I want, but I think that there could be some negative consequences once you just centralize it in the way that we've done. We've just kind of like allowed it to be. It can be corrupted, I guess, when you do it in that way. But like I said, for me, I don't have a specific opinion on that. That would be something that I would like to research and to figure out what we can do to address that based upon a certain set of principles. But what I address more or less is that I just kind of look at what principles do we use to evaluate the system? How are we going to build a system or reform a system based upon a certain set of principles? So that's kind of my focus, is just the foundational principles in addressing any of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, David, you've addressed this from a broader sense, but I want to drill down on the whole concept of ethical leadership and where specifically you think it's lacking in America, because I know that you believe that America needs to have a wake-up call from an ethical leadership standpoint, my friend. So I'm wondering if you wanted to elaborate any on that stance or concept, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, so as I stated before, there is an expectation of raising individuals in America. There's an assumption that you have personal agency. And so for me, what I go through in the book is I start to focus on leadership, because, I mean, I think it's difficult for the majority of people to develop, I guess, evolve and all of those things. But I think as far as leadership, if we're going to have a basic fundamental principle to operate upon, I think that our leaders should be representative of that fundamental, that basis, I guess. And so that's why I address political leaders. And my argument is more, if we're going to have a country that's built for individuals, we should not have leaders who do not exhibit these traits. And so that's the journey that I try to take people on. What determines an individual? How does a person become an individual? It's not, and what you start to learn, and when you look at psychology and philosophy, is that it's not just being a person with a body. Individual is a person who uses their judgment. Your judgment is what makes you, your independent judgment is what makes you an individual. And so if I go through the ideas that Jung has about these things, and I just kind of whittle it down to say, well, this is what determines an individual. And if we have political leaders who aren't exhibiting these traits, then I don't find that they are adequate to be political leaders in a country that is built on individualism.
Yeah, and Damien, I want to bring your attention to something that Gallup and the Harris poll sort of put together, and it found that 54% of Americans today believe that there's a lack of moral leadership in the country. Would you agree with that?
I would. I definitely would.
And is there a particular reason why you think morality is lacking in American government?
I don't think that people know what they mean when they say that. I think there's an assumption that we know what we mean when we say that. And I mean, I'm coming from a place where I just assumed that I knew what I meant when I said that as well. But that's why, to me, this work is important, because it's about getting to the specifics of what does morality, what does being moral mean? What what should we pursue to be a more moral nation? And I think because we don't have an understanding of what being moral is, then we just, yeah, we you can find yourself in a place where there's a lack of morality. And so I think that's just kind of a byproduct of not being clear about or clear on the definitions of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got one more question about ethics before we move on, my friend. In terms of
Okay.
America's future when it comes to ethics and the role of safeguarding liberty, my friend, I know that you believe that that is fundamentally important to safeguard the future of both ethics and our democracy as well. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about it.
Yeah, it speaks to the point when I talk about leadership, and if there are leaders who do not have a personal connection with the idea of an individual, I mean, at its an accurate idea of the individual, I don't believe that those people can lead a country like America properly. I don't think that they can. And so to speak to that point a little bit more, it's just that there the idea of it, and I'll just say something like that comes from Carl Jung. The idea of an individual is a fairly new concept throughout the history of time. Right. And so when we look further and further back into primitive history, like it was just total collectivity. And so the idea of an individual evolved over time. And I think we move on the assumption that, oh yeah, that person's an individual. Everyone's an individual. And that's just not that's not what we've learned throughout history. Becoming an individual is an evolution of a person, identifying, finding what makes them separate from others. And so there's some other concepts that he speaks about and I talk about in the book that kind of gives more clarity to that idea. But we're coming from a place of total collectivity to some individuality. And so we just need to pursue that individuality that's at the base of American principles to even, to maintain and safeguard liberty, because that is what liberty is for. It's about the individual.
Yeah, and you bring up liberty, my friend, and I wanted to quickly ask you about the Supreme Court, because that's one branch of government that clearly has an ethics problem. So how do you think we can get ethical morality back in our judicial branch of government, and how do we restore America's trust in the highest court? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, so I did not focus a lot on the judicial branch in the book. I guess my general thoughts on that are the legislative branch creates the laws, or they create the laws. And the judicial branch is supposed to uphold those laws and adhere to those laws when, I guess, mediating cases. And so my focus is really on the legislative branch, because they are the source of what the judicial branch is supposed to adhere to. Now, just like law, even like you might see this in police officers or anyone else, people do things that may not be in the spirit of the law. And, I don't think that you would want that to be the case, but because we're individuals, those things kind of happen. So some people have certain takes on different laws, on how to apply them or how they work. That's not something that I get into as well, but the whole idea of creating the law itself or what kind of laws that we create is the more of the focus of what I've tried to approach in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And, David, I'm curious to ask you about your definition of the word innovation when it comes to ethics, politics, and society, my friend. So, how do you define the whole concept of innovation?
I mean, I think when I think of innovation, it's more about incremental positive change. Um, and so my first thoughts are just, you know, have a basic understanding of what exists, um, maintain the good pieces of what exists, and try to build on that. Exclude the bad things or try to improve upon the things that aren't as good. And that's just like a constant movement throughout history. And then that's my opinion of it. And it's kind of contradictory to a conservative approach, where it's just, oh, this thing is good, so let's just keep that and not do anything to it. And I think some people may disagree with that, definition of conservatism. They may just think, oh, I just want slow change. But I don't think that slow change in itself is a good thing. Good changes are good and bad changes are bad. And so for me, it's just about that incremental positive change, that movement. That to me is innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, David, I'm curious to ask you whether you think ethics can play a role in helping to reduce political violence throughout the country. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Oh, I mean, political violence, I feel like that's done by individuals, but I think the idea, hmm, I don't know how much I would say ethics would uh, mitigate political violence, but I think the goal is to come up with a system that allows people the space to make their own decisions, and not be intrusive in their lives. Um, I think, I guess we've seen a case of political violence recently, and I think there could be some, and I can't speak on this. I'm not a psychological expert or anything like that, but there could be some things with some psychological things where people feel like, they have to act, or else, or else the world is not going to be the way that it should. I'm not necessarily sure, but I guess the idea that I approach this with is just more of a, government should not be intrusive in people's lives. And I think a good ethical foundation is the place to start for an appropriate political structure or government structure. And so allowing people the freedom to be themselves, not telling them who, I don't know, gender or who to be with romantically, or, what kind of controls they should have on their bodies, what they should put in their body, what they should, those types of ideas, I think, kind of open the door for people to feel put upon. So I think those are some elements of what, may cause people to have a negative response and think that they need to act out as far as violently or political violence. So
Yeah, yeah, and David, I'm also curious to ask you about the connection between ethics and personal character, and whether you think those two things are interconnected.
I mean, I do. I think that one informs the other, but I do think that they should remain distinct parts. Um, I don't know how many people would be good at that, but the whole idea is that ethics to me is about how people interact with each other. And a personal character is, for me, I guess I kind of align it more with morality. I know a lot of people don't make that distinction, but I do. And I think that the way that you think about yourself is very personal. The things that you want in your life, the things that you think are good for you in a certain context are separate from, what responsibility, I guess you could say, that you might have ethical responsibility. And though those things may interact or inform each other, it's very important that a person maintains a personal identity and not let the collective identity dictate everything in their lives, because that would be a negative thing. So what's another thing that I dive deeply into in the book, and so yeah, I think those things should inform each other, but they should also be thought of as distinct things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm curious to end our conversation about ethics and morality, about centering it around the concept of hope, my friend. And what do you think it'll take to restore ethical morality? And what's your greatest hope for the future?
I mean, I guess I would push back on the concept of hope, because to me, like, hope is an irrational concept. You have a conviction and you work towards that conviction. You work towards what you want to see or what you don't want to see. You try to get rid of it. So the whole idea, I guess, for me is and this is the influence for me to write the book. I want people who want a better world to be more intellectual, more discerning, more specific about what that means, and approach that with the conviction that is unparalleled. I think a lot of times what we see is that because people are confused about what we're pursuing, or they're not even pursuing anything at all, that's what kind of, that's what makes people take a back seat when things that aren't good, when they're happening, they don't have the base or the understanding to act out against those things, because they don't have an understanding of their core principles. I mean, it's just like a company, kind of like with the mission statement. It's just like, who do we want to be? And let's pursue that at all times. And if there's something that comes up that we don't want to be, and we know that, we just bypass it. We don't accept those ideas. And I guess the last part on that is that you need fierce leaders to do this. You need fierce leaders to combat, I guess, kind of like what I say in this book, of the enemies of reason, or people who are against individualism. So you just need that kind of conviction. And that's what I hope to inspire in some people with what I write.
Absolutely. And my final question for you this morning has to do with legacy and your own personal and professional legacy, and how you want that to be defined.
Oh, wow. I don't think that I think about legacy a lot. I think about the things that I want in my life, and I pursue them, and I make the best decisions that I can in that moment. And legacy to me is something for other people to think about, not for me. One of my things that I adhere to is the very best you can do is always good enough. And so if I'm doing the very best that I can do, then that's always good enough. And people can judge it however they want, but that's not for me. That's not something that I can really change, or it's outside of my circle of influence. If I take a Stephen Covey quote, it may be in my circle of concern, but I try to limit most things to my circle of influence. What can I directly impact? What decisions can I make today? Who can who am I, and let me pursue me and pursue what I want. And then legacy and impressions or perspectives of others, it's interesting, but it doesn't really change what I'm going for, really.
Fair enough, my friend. And finally, tell me if people want to get connected with you, my friend, or buy the book, what's the best way they can do that?
I think Amazon is the best way to buy the book. And I guess my website is damientdubose.com, DAMIENTDUBOSE.com. There are links there as well. And I just keep updates of things that I have going on. And Amazon, America's Ethical Archetype. You can find it there. And I hope to hear from people too. I like to hear feedback. I look at this as a beginning of a conversation. So I'm definitely open and love the feedback that I've gotten from people.
Well, fabulous, my friend. I want to thank you for sharing this space of conversation with me, my friend, and all of your views on political ethics and the role society plays with that as well, my friend. I want to thank you for writing the book. It's an eye-opening look at the way that the political dysfunction currently exists in America and some solutions to try and fix it. So I want to wish you the best of luck with the book, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this morning. It's most appreciated.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. Thank you for having me. It's been great.